talking about at dinner that I think the title doesn't do the book complete justice, and it might put a few people off. But the book there's tremendous depth in this book. You said you're interested in the masculine and feminine polarities and how they play out. This is really a huge part of the book. And it's also an experiential book in the sense that it's meant not just as an intellectual concepts, but to actually work on the deeper, subtle levels of transformation. And there are some exercises in the book as well. And the book was, we were joking about, they gave me copies of the book, and I mean, I looked through it, and I might even endorsed it, I don't know, but
yes, you have.
I have, but I didn't really dig into it until I knew I had to do this interview. I thought, I can't procrastinate long, I really got to read the book, and it kind of blew me away as I was reading it, because there was such depth to it. And I thought before I got into it that I understood it, but in fact I didn't. I really needed to read the book, and I'm undergoing right now, I can't get into the details, but I'm undergoing my own sort of hero's journey, my own transformative process is occurring right now in my life and at work. So this book was absolutely perfect timing for me personally. No, sometimes you talked about synchronicity as well. For me, this was very strong synchronicity that it was good that I put off reading the book until I read it, because now I'm really in a good place to receive it. So I don't say this very often, but this book really has my highest recommendation. And I did work with Raj on conscious capitalism, and that was such a fun thing to do. Raj is a brilliant man, and he's a very excellent writer. And Nilima is a pretty enlightened person. She has the book talks about presence. You can't hang out with her for very long without feeling her clearness of presence whenever you're around her, and you probably get a little bit of a feel for that tonight. So with that, why don't we kind of get in? Did you guys want to make maybe opening statements about the book before we get into kind of interviewing?
Well, just to add that my hidden motive to get you to interview us at the Book People was to get you to read the book. And, I must say there is amazing synchronicity if we only are mindful to it and just recognize it at work. So what you just said is very validating, that there is something else at work in the material in this book, and it'll get to the people it needs to get to when they are ready.
Speaking of synchronicity, we were with the author of a book called Synchronicity today, which is an incredible book. So Joseph Jaworski, for those of you, how many of you have read that book? And to me, the two books that I think are the most impactful are Man's Search for Meaning and Synchronicity. If I had to quickly name
And
two
Conscious
books.
Capitalism.
That's modesty, John. I don't talk about it. But no, it's been a pleasure for me to be part of this. It's really been a privilege. As John said, Nilima truly is far more enlightened than most of us, and I've learned a great deal from her. And this idea of the feminine is something that, as part of the work on conscious capitalism over the last 10 years, I had observed that there's a great deal of more feminine energy in conscious companies. They are based on love and care. They're based on empathy and compassion and relationships and a win-win mindset, and these are generally considered more feminine traits. And at the same time, in the world, we're seeing the rise of feminine values as well, although it doesn't seem like that sometimes. The reality is that we are on a trajectory where women and the values that are considered feminine are actually becoming mainstream. Women are 58% of college students in the US, and actually that's the average across 28 OECD countries, the industrialized world. Women outnumber men in college everywhere in the world except for South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So even in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq, all those places, there are more women in college than men. And they get better grades and they graduate at a higher rate. So if you look at what that means for society, eventually every white-collar profession will be statistically dominated by women. It's already happening. Women outnumber men in the US workforce already.
They still can't beat us in basketball.
In the things that matter, they're in. Sorry. John is a huge basketball fan. So with that background, I had that sense of that there's something happening here that's connected to the rise of the feminine, and then Nilima was coming at it from another direction, which is the idea of Shakti, which we will get into. So that's the combination here.
Okay, so I do think this rise of feminine values is extremely important. It's probably, arguably, the most important thing going on in the world. It is, but of course, as we're going to get into this book a little bit as you read it, it's not just the emergence of the feminine so much as it's the integration of both the masculine and feminine. Women claiming their, while not diminishing their feminine energy, claiming their masculine power, and men, while not surrendering their masculinity, claiming the feminine power and integrating those together. And by the way, that's really one of the real powerful things about this book. So I think the first question is the sort of obvious one. What the heck does Shakti mean? What does that mean? What is Shakti? What does Shakti mean, and what's that to do with leadership?
Thank you. The first element in the model is called presence, and we've been talking about it, that to be a conscious leader, you should come from a place of presence, where you're not conditioned by your ego and you're not having something to defend, promote, or fear. You can step back from those three centers and be in a place of presence. Now, when you are present, you become aware that there is a power that's moving through you. And that is an evolutionary power that is growing your nails and your hair. It's making the electrons and atoms move inside you. It is moving the cosmos. It is an evolutionary force. And if we know how to simply put ourselves in accord with that power, the universe has our back, literally. Now, that power is Shakti. The power of presence is Shakti. The power of consciousness is Shakti. What does it have to do with leadership? This comes from my Indian background. Growing up in India, it was all the dinner time conversations would be about who's in power, right? Politics and who got the big job and who's become CEO, and it was all about. It seemed to me this whole game is about power, and everyone is figuring out how to jockey for more power. And then I came across the idea of Shakti, and I put the two together, and I realized we're like fish dying of thirst while we're swimming in water. There is so much power inside us. It's moving us. And we're like operating on these little batteries that run out all the time. Okay? So if we're talking about becoming a conscious leader, an unconscious leader, I guess, would work from a power base which is based on their privilege. A conscious leader would therefore require a new power base. And that new power base would be this unlimited source that is inside us, and that is Shakti. So I realized if we need to write a book on the first tenet, one of the four tenets of conscious capitalism, which is conscious leadership, how about introducing the idea of the power from which you do that leadership? How do you exercise power? What kind of power do you exercise?
So you're saying Shakti is not necessarily either masculine or feminine. It's the source of power, the source of energy that is within everything.
Thank you. And the reason in the yogic tradition we call it her or the great mother is only because just like in the Chinese tradition they have the yin and the yang. The yin is the feminine, the yang is the masculine. In the yogic tradition, the primal duality is understood as consciousness and its energy. And consciousness is considered the divine masculine, Shiva, and its force, its power to create and give forth the creation is the feminine and Shakti. So because Shakti is the source from which everything else then arrives and everything eventually materializes, it's like the mother. And therefore it is considered feminine.
So still, what does that have to do with leadership? What does that make the connection for us?
Make the connection. When you lead, essentially, you have to drive change. You have to drive an outcome from where you are to where you want to get to. And that requires fuel, that requires energy, that requires power. You could be a Mercedes-Benz, but you could go nowhere if you didn't have the fuel in it, right? And currently we're all operating on maybe low-grade diesel when we could have it powered by some real octane Shakti, right? So the leadership element is becoming mindful about what kind of power am I exercising as I lead. Am I leveraging my badge, my card, my title, my money, my bank balance, or am I actually coming from, really, another word for it would be soul force, right? And that's what Gandhi used when he got independence for India with, by owning 9 things which all fit inside one picture, right? And yet here was a man powered by a totally different fuel and led some very transformational outcomes.
Okay, so we've got this power within us, this Shakti energy within us. So great. How do we make sure our car is driving on that energy instead of on that low-grade diesel fuel? Presence,
the whole practice of presence. And this is where all the wisdom traditions just don't let you get away. There is no alternative to practice, practice, practice. Now you can call it mindfulness, you can call it centering, you can get on the mat and do yoga, you can do your qigong. What is your way that brings you out of your ordinary anxiety, where you have something to lose, promote, or fear, or defend? What gets you out of that and puts you in this place of, I am here now, all I need is within me, and I can just flow and respond to what is asked of me in this moment, knowing that what is needed will come. Now that is a place of presence, and you cultivate presence. You have to put in the practice. I know you've done years of your own inner work. So there is inner transformational work. There are many ways to get there. Once you put in that cultivation of presence, from there will flow the leadership powered by Shakti.
Could I add something to that? So, the idea of going back to power, there is power over people and there's power with. Right? So a conscious leader does not exercise power over, which is based upon ego, which is based upon position, which means that for me to be powerful, I have to take away your power. So if you think about all the so-called powerful leaders of the last century, Hitler and Stalin and so forth, they made everybody else powerless because they centralized and captured all of that power. A conscious leader is actually sourcing power in a different way. So it's not power over, it's power with. They're actually making everybody else more powerful. Right? And they're channeling all of that power together in a way that's aligned with what seeks to unfold. So if you step back and say, well, what's happening with evolution? The universe is evolving, we know that, and has been for 10, 12 billion years. Is it a random trajectory, or is there in fact a purpose to evolution? Is there a trajectory to it that we can discern? And there's a wonderful book by a friend of ours, Steve McIntosh, which is called Evolution's Purpose. And if you think about it that way, the evolution does have a purpose. It's evolving towards higher states of being, higher states of mutuality and togetherness and coming together. We started with quarks and became electrons and then atoms and molecules and cells and organisms and higher forms of life and human beings ultimately. And that's not the end. That's the journey. So we're on that journey towards higher states of being. So there's something that's fueling that and something that's building that trajectory. And if we as a leader are aligned with that, in some way we kind of tap into that flow, and we are agents of that which seeks to emerge or needs to emerge, sort of the righteous outcomes that should happen in the world, then we have access to all of that power, which is what Gandhi had, right? I mean, he had no power. He was never elected to a single office. He didn't hold any kind of resources, anything at all. But he had that power because he was aligned with something that was righteous. And that, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think similar idea. So to the extent that you as a leader are channeling that and visualizing that kind of outcome and then making everybody else aligned with that vision and everybody's power then consolidates, I think, into that. I think that's, to me, another way of understanding this idea of infinite power that we just have to figure out how to tap into. That makes sense, John, as somebody who actually leads. I don't lead anything, I just talk.
Well, what you're kind of saying in a way is that the Shakti power can people abuse the Shakti power? Can you tap into that and then do bad things with it, or is it only a force for good?
That's a great question.
That's why you pay me the big bucks for this.
If you're not present, there are ways in which one can meddle with this power and use it for personal gain. But really, eventually, you will get consumed by it. So there is the long arm of justice, universal justice, divine justice. Call it what you will. But yes, that's why the idea of presence as the first element in this model. From a place of presence, tap into Shakti. Don't try and get into Shakti without doing the presence work, because sometimes you can get extremely empowered and you can really mess it up. You can abuse it.
So, one of the things that fascinated me about the book was the book takes on Joseph Campbell's work in mythology, the hero's journey, and really lays that out in a very powerful way. And then adds another element to it that never occurred to me before I read the book, the heroine's journey. That in fact, the hero and the heroine don't necessarily have the same exact journey. Could you talk about both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, and how that might be relevant to our potential readers?
So this is the work of Maureen Murdoch, who used to follow Joseph Campbell's work, and she went and interviewed him to say, all your heroes are men. Where are the women in all your stories? And he flippantly replied and said, they don't, women are already there. They are where the hero is trying to get to. They've already arrived. They don't need to make the journey. And she wasn't satisfied with that answer. So she went and figured out that map for herself. And that book is called The Heroine's Journey. You may even have it in the store. So that was a tremendous, resource for me when putting this material together. How is it different? Essentially,
what is the hero's journey, first of all?
Okay.
I mean, we hear that a lot, but
Yes.
what does it mean?
The hero's journey is essentially a map for how human beings become adults and self-directed humans on this planet. It's a rite of passage. It's a coming of age from our innocence into our maturity and our adulthood. And you could say in leadership, it's when we are no longer led by circumstances, but we actually learn to direct them, and we become, we lead the outcomes. Both what's going on within us, we are aligned and congruent with that inner scape, and that is aligned and congruent with our purpose and where we are going. So coming into that is a heroic effort. It takes courage. And what Joseph Campbell did brilliantly is he studied the mythologies of all the different cultures, and he discerned this one story, and it's called the monomyth. And it has 17 stages, and other authors have brought it down to 12. In this book, to make it really simple, we bring it down to 4. So essentially, there's a crisis where, as the hero, the young innocent, you are just thrown out of your ordinary world, and you're now treading water. You've fallen into the magical, strange, unconscious underworld, whatever. It's a world you don't know. It's a magical world. You experience trauma. And the only way to deal with that trauma is to then eventually face your worst fear. The one thing you don't want to face, the one thing you don't want to look at, you have to face that. You've got to slay that dragon. When you do that, you transform. You discover capacities, potencies you never knew you had. You are transformed. Now, this is a stage where it's wonderful. You want to hang around in this wonderful la-la land because there are all these amazing magical powers and creatures, and it's a beautiful world. But you're kind of pushed out of that again as well for that 4th step, which is called the gift. You bring back some kind of an elixir. You having journeyed isn't something that you do for yourself. There is a grander plan the universe seems to have, which is you have journeyed and found a gift, which is the very thing your community, your tribe, your family, your organization, whatever it is you call your tribe, needs to to its next level. It may be stuck and it needed a solution and a way out. And the hero brings that back by having journeyed and kind of died in some way and got resurrected.
So I noticed that that some of the most popular modern mythologies are based on the hero's journey. Star Wars is a great example of the hero's journey, as is Lord of the Rings. And I also think Harry Potter is another hero's journey. And he goes through his own transformative processes, which is why those things resonate so deeply on the cultural level, I think, because they tap into the archetypes, the parts of our being that we resonate with on an unconscious level. So, but what was very intriguing to me, because I identify with the hero's journey personally, but can you talk more about the heroine's journey and how, it's not exactly the same as the hero's journey, so talk about that. I think that'll be particularly interesting to women.
So broadly, I think the hero's greatest fear is failure. The heroine's greatest fear is violation. Right there.
I got a lot of female hums.
And when the woman journeys, she really journeys to, there is some kind of almost like a rape or seduction trauma, which pushes her into this dark night of the soul where she has to die in some way to her innocence. There is this deep loss of innocence, and she needs to slay the dragon of feminine inferiority, as Maureen Murdoch would say. That women are incomplete without men, that women are dependent on men, that women, there's the third one I always forget, but it's sorry, it's in the book, I'm sure. It's along the same lines that, and the woman has to slay that dragon, that myth, that toxic myth that has permeated the culture through the patriarchy, which she has subconsciously and unconsciously bought. And this facing of her fear, her long dark night of the soul, is really to face that inferiority and to discover, she goes back to meet Shakti, the great mother, and finds that within herself. And now she is reconnected, so to speak. The mother-daughter split is healed. She becomes her own mother, and she becomes her own lover. So a woman journeys for love, romance, where a man may journey for adventure. Okay? So
that was the third one. That romance was the third one.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, John. You read everything, didn't you? Yes. Yes. This whole thing about you complete me, right? That Tom Cruise says in that movie, and all the women swoon. And when the heroine wakes up, she realizes, oh my God, that's not how it works. You can't have another man complete you. You have to complete yourself. You become your own mother and you become your own lover. Now you're a whole person. Now you're a potent new being. Now you have your Shakti flowing through you. And now you can come back and you find a new tribe. You find women, once you have journeyed, who have also journeyed before you. And it's not as if you go back to the old. You very often find a whole new tribe of empowered women.
It's very powerful stuff. So Raj, what the heck are you doing writing this book?
I'm a victim of the patriarchy, which actually is a joke, but actually is also very true. I mean, the patriarchy has been the dominant mode, right? And I come from a culture, India, where it's, I think, even more, except for pockets. There are parts of India that are matriarchal, but I come from a subculture that is intensely patriarchal to the point of being feudal, right? And it's understood that through that men have privilege and women are the victims of that, but actually men are equally victims of the patriarchy. And it's deeply harmful to a young boy to be told when he's in pain or suffering in some way not to cry, be a man, right? Don't express any emotion. One of the lovely phrases that Nilima used in the book, which I love, is vulnerability is not a liability, it's an ability. It's right in the word, right? And the fact that men and boys have been subjected to that way of being, which is really kind of leaving the more human side of your persona out and not having access, not having permission to express that. Now, what does that do to a male? What does that do to a male child? It creates, what do you call it, the infantile wound, right? When that is suppressed, how does that show up later in life? As violence, right? As acting out. I mean, all the things that that wounded inner child, right? That's carried around. So there's wounding for girls, which is more an adolescent thing, but for boys, it's really at an earlier age. So, having come out of that kind of a system and not identified with it. So I grew up in a feudal system where, for me, what came naturally to me was not that tendency, right? So in a way, I'm more like my mother than I am like my father. And therefore, these ideas of masculine, feminine, the language gets in the way. Men don't like to be told that they're embodying feminine values. Somehow that is seen as weak or whatever, right? In the normal terminology of things. But if you take all of that out of it, you start to say, yeah, you're in touch with, your emotions. You're in touch with vulnerability. You're able to relate. You have empathy. You can have compassion. You can, have all of those kinds of things. I think that is extremely needed. But having grown up in that kind of a system, I had to suppress all of those kinds of tendencies and say, wow, that makes me weaker, or that makes me less of a human being. And I think after becoming part of this conscious capitalism world and meeting leaders like John and many others in this movement, men and women, who are very much integrated beings, they definitely embody the masculine and feminine. They talk about love and care, right? They talk about relation. I mean, Whole Foods started by John asking the question, can we build a business on love? Right? In 1978 or whenever it was. And as I said, most of these other leaders embody that. So I think that starts to now, and also my own work, where I wrote a book called Firms of Endearment, which was about companies that are loved and operate on love. And in fact, we had tears in our eyes, two men writing that book, in our writing retreats, as we wrote some of the stories, seeing the deep humanity that is possible, even within a business, which we never thought could exist, because the traditional narrative of business is what? It's a dog-eat-dog world, right? It's not personal, it's business, only the paranoid survive. All of those myths about business. And then at the end of that research, when we found these companies, including Whole Foods, and 27 others, that had those qualities, and then we looked at the fact that, how do they perform financially? Well, it turns out they way outperform other companies. So being this way is not a sign of weakness. This is the ultimate source of strength. The most powerful force in the universe is love. People will do things from love that you will never get them to do out of fear. Right? Extraordinary feats of courage and heroic achievements. So coming to that realization that this is a source of power and strength, and it's not a liability and a weakness. So I don't even know where I started and what the question was, but, but I think this is what it's kind of brought everything together to me. And I believe that book not only gave me permission to be who I was, and to say it's okay to be that way in the world, to have that side of you. I've met people around the world who told me that book enabled me, it sort of gave me self-validation that I'm okay, and that I can actually live like this and think like this, right? And I don't have to, you can actually succeed even better by doing this. So it gives you permission to be your whole human, caring, vulnerable self. And that's really why I was part of this. I really wanted to honor that, because those qualities that I see in women, and my mother and my sister and so many others, and many men as well, I find those are the far richer human qualities. I don't admire the domination, aggression, and winning at all costs, and everything is a form of war. For too long, every societal institution has been run by men on a limited set of masculine values: domination, aggression, competition, winning results at all costs. Right? Everything is a form of war. And that has led to progress, but it has also led to unimaginable suffering. And we don't have to do that. I think we're rising above that now, in this century. And so we say the 19th century was about the end of slavery, and the 20th was about the end of totalitarianism, and the 21st is about the end of the suppression and the sidelining of the feminine. And our friend Lynn Twist used a beautiful metaphor that the bird of humanity for too long has been flying with one wing tied behind its back, the feminine wing. And therefore the masculine wing had to become aggressive and almost violent to keep us afloat. And now that we can release that, and it goes around in circles if you only have one wing. And now that you unleash the other, we can soar higher and go further. And I think that's really the wonderful story of where we are in our history right now.
So, again, kind of back to the Shakti leadership theme, can you kind of describe what the model of that looks like?
So I love the fact that Raj and you came up with the 4 tenets, and I was thinking, how can we create a conscious leadership model for the conscious leadership tenet that also has a similar, you can count on your fingers kind of thing. So this has become the 5 elements and the journey to them. Okay? So the first element is presence. To be a Shakti leader, a conscious leader, you need to have cultivated presence, where you're not coming from your ego, your unhealthy ego. From there, the second element, which is you access and tap into the power of Shakti. Third element, once you have presence and Shakti, you develop these 3 capacities, 3, 4, and 5. Wholeness is the ability to have integrated all the lost parts, the lost halves. Okay, so you've integrated your ego and your shadow, you've integrated your masculine and your feminine energies, and eventually, if you'll get there, you integrate your ego self and your higher self. But for the purpose of this book, we really focused on the masculine and feminine and being able to put that together. So wholeness is the ability to integrate all the lost parts of yourself. Then comes the 4th element, which is flexibility. This is also called agility, and it's a major competency required in leadership. So looking at psychological wholeness, where we say you've got to become the wise fool of tough love, that in a way is the sum and substance of this entire work, just that one line. Can you become the wise fool of tough love? Wise is having integrated your parent self. Fool is having embraced your wondrous, imaginative child self. Tough is that masculine self, the inner man, and love is the feminine, the inner woman. That is your psychological wholeness, and flexibility would be the ability to not be stuck in one of these as your preferred dominant archetype, but to know how to move to any one of these as needed. So when you're stuck in a dilemma or any leadership challenge, to ask yourself, which of these do I need to dial up and dial down? Right there, you'll be able to move through whatever it is you are stuck in. So the 4th element is flexibility. And the 5th is congruence. I like the yogic term for this, that what is your swadharma, right? Are you on purpose? And whatever is your purpose has to essentially be who you essentially are. So according to your swabhav, your innate nature, you have to find your purpose and who you are to be and what you are here to do in the world. So how do you align that, your inner nature with your purpose, and are you now on purpose? Finding that purpose and moving towards it would be the 5th element. So